depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our Tuesday live stream. We've had a couple week hiatus here due to summer holiday and whatnot, but we're back here resuming our weekly Tuesday live stream. Thanks for being here. Today's topic we're going to cover is digitization in 2025 and beyond, key trends in enterprise technology. So we're going to talk about digital strategy type stuff. If I were to summarize the topic, we're going to talk about its digital strategy type stuff, as well as just trends and things that are emerging in the marketplace that are important to be aware of. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients reach the third stage of digital transformation success. This live stream that you're part of here today is actually going to be part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So we film the core interviews for each episode of that podcast. We film those live in a live stream format. It gets edited. We put other content around it. We polish it up and put it in the podcast format. So you're getting to see how the sausage is made by being part of this live stream here today. And that episode, by the way, that will feature this interview will be released a week from tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. Every Wednesday, we release new episodes of Transformation Ground Control on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms. And speaking of those audio podcast platforms and YouTube and LinkedIn, we are streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We're even on Stitch right now as well. So we're streaming to several channels and several platforms right now. So thanks for joining. Wherever you're joining from, we're gonna get to chat and questions, and we want to hear your feedback as well. Any kind of questions or topics you want to cover. That's the reason we do this live, is so we can get your engagement and feedback as well. So encourage any thoughts or any questions you have to please chime in. Before I introduce our guest, as we talk about digitization in 2025 and beyond, key trends in enterprise technology, if you could, the audience joining us here today, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining us from, what country and what city you're in. I always love to hear where the global audience is joining from, and just to understand the diversity and the diverse group we've got here on the line. We usually get a pretty global audience, so it's always interesting and fun to see where everyone's joining from today as part of this global digital transformation community. So as I mentioned, our topic today is key trends in enterprise technology. As you think through the 2020s and beyond, as you think about your digital strategy and roadmap, what are those things we should all be aware of? What are those trends and emerging patterns that are developing in the marketplace? And with us to help unpack that conversation and get his viewpoints today is Greg Benton, the Chief Strategy Officer here at Third Stage Consulting. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be with everyone today. It's really a pleasure to join and bring some experience to the conversation, and also maybe contribute a little bit to the entire day. So,
absolutely. And you were part of our podcast and our live stream a few weeks ago, where we did a consulting panel discussion. So this isn't your first time on the show, although it is your first time in a one-on-one interview format. So thanks for joining today.
Oh, absolutely. And I promise not to bring any props today, like the balloon.
So. Yeah. We were talking about inflated expectations was a point you were trying to make around digital transformation, and you just happened to have a balloon handy to help visual.
Just happened to. Thought it would enhance the visual experience. Right?
Right. Yeah. We'll see what kind of visual aid you can work into the conversation here today as well. So you're Chief Strategy Officer at Third Stage. You're relatively new to the company, but I've known you for about 10 years now, and more importantly, you've been in this industry for more than 20 years. So maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what it is you do now that you're at Third Stage. What do you do at Third Stage?
Sure, Eric. I really come from 20 plus years of implementing, remediating, and deploying ERP systems and software. Also managing the vendor relationships with the software vendors and the systems integrators. But I've had the pleasure of working in partnership with over 100 clients within those years, bringing experience to bear to really advise them on the path toward digital transformation. And that's what I'm doing here at Third Stage. Actually getting very involved with the dedicated people here in a really mission-driven type of approach to digital transformation success with our clients, and happy to join the discussion today.
Right. Well, great. It's great to have you here today, and also great to have you at Third Stage after joining earlier this year. And one of the things that's interesting about your background is, especially as we get into the conversation here today, is that prior to joining Third Stage, obviously Third Stage is technology agnostic. We're independent. We work with all kinds of vendors, and we help clients select and implement all sorts of technologies. But prior to joining Third Stage, you've worked in a number of different channels or different ecosystems related to specific systems. Can you just tell us a little bit about some of the technologies or different systems you've worked with over the years prior to joining Third Stage?
Sure. I mean, that's a great point. I love to talk about that. Worked in a number of industries, including healthcare, manufacturing, distribution, certainly the retail industry as well. And I've worked with Infor, Epicor, Oracle, Workday, SAP, many of the major software vendors, and also a few of the what we call edge solutions or specifically focused solutions like Kronos and workforce management that is now UKG. But in all of that time, I've always maintained a very close connection with the ERP vendors in terms of access and in terms of their roadmap, but also maintained that independence and an advisory relationship rather than a systems integrator relationship. And that's very important and key in putting together the strategy and selection process for a client that is looking for a solution that's going to fit them, that's going to fit their business processes, that's going to be appropriate for them individually. So it's very client-centric. That's why with the Third Stage kind of place in the market and the ecosystem, it fits very well with that experience.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty rare to have that diverse background, that diverse experience in a number of different systems focused roles and that sort of thing, which is a big part of why you're such a good fit at Third Stage. And that'll give you an interesting perspective in our conversation today as well. Good. Well, so I guess if you sort of back up and you look at the last 20 plus years that you've been doing this in this space with enterprise technology, how have the enterprise technology needs of organizations evolved over the years? I mean, because in some ways, I don't know about you, but in some ways you look back at your history or your career, you look back 10, 20 years, a lot of stuff hasn't changed, in the ways organizations operate and in the way they approach digital transformations, which in many ways is a problem in the space. But in other ways, the landscape has shifted dramatically in terms of the technology and all that sort of stuff. But just in general, how would you say the enterprise tech needs of organizations have evolved in more recent years?
Well, I think the needs are still relatively the same. So organizations are still looking for ways to run HR, payroll, finance, supply chain, and that's unfortunately or fortunately been considered really back office applications over the last decade. And in many cases, it's just been what's needed to run operations, right? There has been no strategic advantage associated with the applications that run the business, the enterprise resource planning. But fast forward to today, after a decade of neglect, the software vendors have been improving their systems and improving the way that they integrate and interoperate. And that provides strategic advantage in terms of lowering bottom line costs, increasing top line advantage and competitive position in the marketplace. So ERP systems have really evolved into operational systems. So the enterprise operations now encompasses workforce management and document management and banking and finance systems and automation in that direction. And all of those interrelated pieces of the operations picture can now be managed by either a single source ERP vendor or multiple ERP solutions within a single corporate environment. And that's where we come down to a new selection of platform as well as functional and technical systems within the enterprise. And that
Right.
really is a marked change over the last decade.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you had a couple points that I want to come to, or maybe dig into a little bit on that, which are really interesting. One being early in that response, you mentioned something about competitive advantage, and the word ERP in the same sentence. So I'm just wondering, do you see companies viewing ERP systems and enterprise technologies in general differently in terms of viewing it as more of a competitive advantage versus a necessary evil or just something they have to do? Because I think that's a mindset that is important to digital transformations in general. Just really understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to further the organization and become more competitive? Or are you just trying to keep up? Or are you just trying to have the necessary evil of implementing back office technologies? I mean, how do you view that evolving, if at all, in the industry?
Absolutely. In the past, if it was not broke, don't fix it, was kind of the attitude for ERP systems. But now, really, people are looking at bottom line cost for supporting the applications. The cloud environment, the multi tenant cloud, especially, has reduced the cost of operations.
Mm.
That brings a bottom line cost reduction that many organizations are desperately in need of. Speed and automation of processes. So taking away the kind of the manual process of taking information from one system, porting it over to another system, crunching the numbers, and then making decisions based upon days old or weeks old information really slow down an organization, right?
Mm.
So now the ability to gather information in real time from multiple and disparate different sources within the organization in one source of the truth is providing a real competitive advantage in terms of speed to market, logistics and delivery in terms of manufacturing and distribution, um, the management of supply chains, and being able to work with selected suppliers in order to bolster the supply chain to either a manufactured product or a service delivery is has been magnified tenfold by the new technologies. So that's where people are getting strategic advantage out of their ERP or operation systems.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like if organizations can figure out how to manage their transformations better than they have historically, then they'll be able to not only automate their back office functions and become more efficient, but also move to that next level of value in terms of revenue generating activities, competitive differentiators, all that sort of stuff. But it seems like a lot of organizations, or so many organizations, get stuck just trying to automate something simple like just the GL and accounting. And if they
Right.
can't get past that, then they're not going to be able to get to the point of a lot of the stuff you're talking about, which is truly automating the business, differentiating themselves, providing better customer experience, customer service, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why developing a strategy and developing the objectives of what you want as an organization to look like in the future state is really important. It's imperative to actually achieving that in the digital transformation. What are you transforming to? And there's also a difference between optimizing the systems that you have along the way so that you do a lowercase t transformation as you're getting to the digital transformation that provides competitive advantage, that provides strategic advantage in the marketplace as you finalize what that end model looks like. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, good. Well, I have a few more questions I want to get to here, but before I keep going with additional questions to build on what you were just talking about, I want to come back to the audience and recognize where people are joining from today. And
Yeah.
speaking of automation and broken systems, I have my own situation here today where, for some reason, the stream isn't our software isn't capturing the chat the way it should for all the platforms. So I manually have it open on different devices. So I'm sort of demonstrating the pain of what can what can happen when technology doesn't work well. I'm sort of experiencing that with everyone here real time, which is a great case study of digital transformation, I suppose. But so forgive me if it looks like I'm looking at different devices because I am. So I want to. It looks like we have from YouTube. We have someone, Clayton, joining from Queensland, Australia. Thank you for being here all the way from Australia. Over on LinkedIn, which is the manual part I have to do here and look at my phone. Thank you, Yasser from Saudi Arabia, from being here. Kyler from Denver. Malk from Manchester, UK. Sam Graham from Spain. Thank you for being here again, Sam. And those are just a few examples of where some people are joining from today. So thanks everyone for being here globally and as part of this global digital transformation community. Francisco from Italy over on YouTube. Thank you for being here. So I guess, and by the way, for the audience, before I keep going with my questions here, any questions you have as it relates to enterprise tech trends, digital transformation now and in the future, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And despite my technical issues, I am checking all the streams here, as painful as it may seem and look. I will absolutely do that. So when you look at the speed of technology, so I mentioned before, just my personal opinion is that the speed of technology is accelerating rapidly, but in some ways it seems like organizations are sort of stuck. They're sort of stuck trying to deploy technologies the same way they did, 20 plus years ago when you and I started our careers. But in other ways, the technology is changing really rapidly. So how's that speed of change of technology? How is that affecting organizations, and how do you see organizations dealing with that rapid pace of change, given the fact that people in organizations tend to change slower than technology itself?
Well, that's a little bit of a leading question, because I think that organizations that are looking at making a change, especially enterprise-wide, are really just looking internally and trying to decide how can they move forward, how can they establish governance and management of selecting a system and moving forward with the implementation and deployment of that system. And very often they don't think about bringing in a third party that has really done this literally hundreds of times to help with that process and that strategy. It's remarkable the number of people that we talk with that make a decision for technology reasons, and then they do what we commonly refer to as a lift and shift of the old processes into the new technology. And that creates kind of an equation that I've used in the past, but it's new technology, old processes equals expensive old processes. So if you don't really look at the business process that is underlying what you're trying to do as a strategic decision with regard to technology, then the alignment doesn't happen, the adoption doesn't happen, the change management is difficult. There's a lot that goes into the preparation for an organization to undertake this digital journey that people kind of pass up and just go immediately into the implementation. And that's where I think that people get slowed down, really bogged down.
Yeah, it kind of brings to mind that term that I think it was Michael Hammer, one of the BPR, process reengineering gurus or thought leaders back in the 90s, I think it was. He would talk about the concept of paving the cow paths, and how, if you pave the cow paths, it's not an efficient way to run your operations. And by the way, I was in just recently, I think it was Atlanta. I was in Atlanta or somewhere in the Southeast United States. And I remember someone saying that the reason the roads were so winding and aimless and easy to get lost in, although I can get lost in any city, even including my own. So that's, myself is not a good example of this. But in general, the reason why these roads are so disorganized is because they actually did pave the cow paths, which I didn't know was actually a thing. But Michael Hammer, one of these business process reengineering gurus, talked about process management in some ways as paving the cow paths. And I think that's what you're referring to, is organizations that just take their existing processes that are already broken, inefficient, aren't well thought out, aren't strategically improved. You slap new technology on that, and it's just a more expensive way of doing the same things without the value to come along with that. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organizations don't properly prepare. They don't think about a phase zero, where they're actually preparing the organization for that digital change, for data migration, for integration with the new systems and the legacy systems. So, that is a piece that's very often missed, and people jump right into software selection and implementation right up front.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really important point you're touching on there. And I think that's you talk about tech changing on one hand, technology's changing, there's cloud, there's all this other stuff we're going to get to throughout this conversation. Um, so it's changing quickly. The value potential of technology is only increasing and improving and accelerating. But organizations tend to do what you just described, which is they go find new technology and they just rush right in and start deploying it, and thinking that if we rush right in and start deploying it, we're going to get value faster, right? It sort of
Right.
makes sense, but the reality is you end up rushing and barreling down this path of the status quo and just putting in new technology faster to automate or to put technology in to support the status quo. And that dynamic is sort of what you're saying. We typically with our clients will counter with that implementation readiness or that phase zero of an implementation and taking your time to get that piece right.
Well, think about the organization too, because you're going to spend the next year to 2 years implementing the new technology, right? With the new ERP system. What do you do in the meantime? What happens to the people in their day jobs that are running the organization and the legacy system as they're needed to understand the processes that are going to be conveyed to the new system, and then being able to run that in the new system? Um, that transition, that journey is very seldom really well mapped out, and that's what I'm talking about in terms of kind of strategy, selection of a true partner on the software side, and then get into a phase zero where you're preparing the organization for that change management, and then ultimately for the user adoption and use of the system in the future.
Right. Right. Yeah, and Kyler, who's my podcast co-host, is in on this conversation too, and she made the comment over here on LinkedIn that this is everything we're talking about here right now is sort of like digital transformation insurance. You're sort of insuring, which I like. It's sort of like
Love
an
it.
insurance policy to make sure that you are not only successful and keep the project on track and you don't screw it up, for lack of a better word, but that you take it a step further and not only don't screw it up, but you're actually getting value out of it. And everything you're talking about here is sort of an insurance policy to ensure that stuff happens.
Absolutely. And think about the return on investment too. No one's going into an ERP replacement or an operational upgrade, system optimization, without having an expectation that there is going to be a return on the investment at the end of this, that it's going to be measurable, right? And so you really do have to put that insurance kind of guardrails around the entire project and the deployment to make sure that when you get to the end, your users are fully enrolled, is a term that I use, that they're adopting it, that they are even agents of change in terms of the go forward strategy for the organization. We want to get from here to there, and it's going to make my work, my life easier, simpler, better, and the organization is going to thrive with the new system. Well, you can't get there without a complete roadmap and following through with everything that you develop as an organization to get there.
Right. Right. And I want to get to an audience comment here, which I think illustrates or maybe helps us come at this from a different perspective, or maybe it's an obstacle you can help us unpack here, Greg. But this is from Clayton over on YouTube. He has a comment here, which is, here's our challenge. Not having an ERP is costing us the time we need to implement an ERP. Kind of like a pair of scissors that come in a package that can only be opened with a pair of scissors. So I guess, maybe if I could take that a step further and flip that into a question for you, Greg. And I think it feeds into what you were just saying, that organizations tend to rush into an implementation. And in this case, I would think this is a situation where the organization is probably chomping at the bit, wanting to get a new system, new technology in there as quickly as possible because they need to so badly, because they're so inefficient and they struggle to find the time to implement effectively. How do you counterbalance that, or how do you find that right balance between, the urgency of putting in new technology versus getting it right and, making sure you take the time to do everything you're talking about here?
Well, I think that's a great example, right, of the the need to determine where you want to go and how you're going to operate as a business or as an organization in the meantime, in the interim. So you've got to do your day job, while you're implementing a new software system. And the new software system and the platform that it comes on, and the integration of all of the systems that you've been using that provide specific value to the organization, need to be integrated in a single plan, in a go forward strategy. And so that is getting back to that entire strategy selection phase 0, preparation for the organization to move forward, so that you're not, in this case, you're not even paving cow paths. You're you're constructing cow paths and then paving them, right? So that's what it really takes that upfront decision making, establishing governance that is going to have the kind of the shepherding responsibility for the organization through that interim phase between having no ERP system and then having a complete unified system at the end.
Right. Makes total sense. So just in general, and I want to, after this question, I want to dive into some more specifics that we'll get into, but sort of keeping it, at this high level still. What are some of the most important trends you're seeing in the enterprise tech and digital transformation space? I know you've touched on a few of them already as we've talked about these other topics, but what are some of those important trends you're seeing? I guess maybe more from a technological perspective.
Sure. Well, I will say that I came from an ASP background. So application service providers used to do what is now called cloud, which is hosting technology, right?
The cloud's a much better name, right? So ASP is the same thing. ASP is pretty much the same thing as cloud, but cloud's just a better name, and that name has really caught on better than
cloud's a much better name. And it also describes a different process, right?
Right.
So cloud computing, especially multi-tenant cloud, is an instance of the software in the cloud that's continually upgraded, and that's a huge technology change. The other piece of that is, there are multiple cloud systems out there. There are multiple on-premise systems that have to stay, depending upon the manufacturing process, or depending upon in the case of healthcare providers, connection with the EHR system or clinical systems. And so they need to stay connected and interoperable. And that's what I'm seeing as a trend, is that you really have to pull multiple systems together and have them integrate and interoperate. In other words, bidirectional information flow, to have a unified system going forward. And one of the changes that's happening very rapidly is people are looking for rapid time to value in terms of integrating those systems into a unified platform. That's ultimately the goal of a new ERP system, right? Is you have one single source of the truth for all the data coming in. If you can connect those and connect the disparate systems up front, instead of doing it along at the end of the implementation, then you can derive real value starting within a couple of months of starting the digital transformation journey. So that's what I'm seeing as an important technology change, is that interoperability hub or central spoke of this entire process.
Yeah, and you mentioned before in one of the earlier questions I asked you touched on this whole concept of a platform, and how companies or organizations are not only thinking about single ERP systems as they may have in the past, but now thinking more about just what's the general platform and what systems can I sort of plug and play and mix and match into that platform environment. Could you maybe talk about that and elaborate on this interoperability concept while we're at it?
Absolutely. A great friend of mine and really an industry expert, and Eric, you are one, but this was another one.
You mean there's more than one? Oh.
Describe all of those interrelated systems and the applications and everything that runs an organization as variously a haystack or a spaghetti bowl. And a lot of those things are not going to change as you go forward. You're still going to have elements of the haystack feeding into a core ERP system at the center and needing a way to connect that. The interoperability idea is pulling together all of those sources of information into one central repository, normalizing that data, and then reporting out that data on a kind of a top end basis that really celebrates finding the needle in the haystack. So that's really what's happening in the future is all of those systems coming together to operate the organization or to propel the organization forward need to interoperate, especially for that interim period that we talked about. So as you're starting the implementation, how am I going to operate from now until a year from now, 2 years from now, when my ERP system is fully implemented? That has to interoperate while you're getting there. And you think about mergers, acquisitions, PE firms, and the bringing in of affiliates and other organizations into the operations system. You need a way to connect them as you're going. So be able to interoperate as your organization is actually changing along the way.
Yeah. And it almost seems like one could view ERP as sort of a central core, for financials, inventory management, master data type stuff. And that's going to, be a common core that a lot of organizations could leverage. But when it comes to your specific industry or your specific needs or some of the more advanced capabilities outside of that core, things like demand planning or business intelligence, even when you get into artificial intelligence and things like that, it seems like that's where you sort of want to build that sort of a hub and spoke sort of model where you do have a core. You could still have a core ERP system, but you also need to look at how can we extend that core and add on different technologies that could expand that capability.
Absolutely, and we've been talking about some of the major ERP systems and some of the ancillary or edge solutions. But if you think about enterprise performance management, bringing something into a Strata or one of the EPM solutions, all of that information needs to flow into a central repository. To your point, that is a core ERP system, but then to become actionable, it needs to be real-time data that predicts what's happening for the enterprise, for the organization going forward. And that provides that strategic advantage that we were talking about in the very beginning, that new ERP systems, that connecting new ERP systems as a holistic enterprise operations platform is really what drives value. So, the people that are listening, people globally, you can actually become an agent of change within your organization, pointing out how all of this can come together pretty simply, but you need to be aware of what's out there, what's available, how systems interoperate, and you need to choose a good partner to do that. Again, finding the needle in the haystack.
Right. And to find that needle in the haystack too, you need a certain level of objectivity and neutrality, independence, all the stuff that third stage espouses and provides to our clients. Otherwise, you're gonna, because I think if you talk to an ERP vendor and ask them about what you just said, they might say, yeah, but our software is the needle in the haystack. Just deploy our software. That'll give you all these edge solutions, all these hub and spoke types of capabilities. But I think, anyone that's been doing this for long enough knows that ERP systems or no sort of enterprise technology can be everything to everyone. It's just not possible. So you have to find the technology, the right mix and match that works best for you as an organization.
Absolutely. Well said.
And speaking of well said, here from Ryan on LinkedIn, here's a really good question that I wanted to, that's relevant to what we're talking about here, and it's maybe helps us build on it a little bit. But again, I apologize, I can't show it on the screen because I'm having my own digital transformation issues with our streaming software. But the comment here is, I absolutely struggle with the whole making your ERP the place where you store and do everything. I personally think you should have your ERP be viewed as plug and play. let other systems who are strong and amazing at what they do just augment and make your ERP that much better. I think that's a really good. I think that's well said. What are your thoughts on that? Sort of that plug and play. Have ERP be a central hub, but you're still sort of mixing and matching or plugging and playing other technologies to get more value out of that ERP system.
Well, Ryan, I wholeheartedly agree with you that it would be nice if you could plug and play the ERP system, especially if you have things like an independent data warehouse where you're bringing all that information into one repository and reporting out of it. Very cool. But I can tell you that the major ERP systems have really evolved over the last even 2 years, and accelerated by the pandemic to include a lot of those kind of unified platform elements that can bring data real time from multiple sources within the organization and report out on it. So I think that you used to have a completely separate data warehouse or EPM, enterprise performance management strategy, on top of core ERP. But I think a lot of the ERP systems now have incorporated, have acquired, have grown that capability as well. So that's where it comes down to, what is the best fit for my organization? Should I have a separate data management and analytics strategy, or should I have that incorporated as part of my ERP strategy?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And you've hit on and mentioned a few different types of technologies that can help, your data analytics and business intelligence, CRM on the sales side, supply chain management on the supply chain side, you have HCM on the HR side. So I think that's,
Data
there's a lot of,
management, banking.
yeah. Yeah. EHR, and someone on LinkedIn, in one of the chats I was just looking at, someone else mentioned healthcare. And that's an industry, well, that they have the electronic health records, types of technologies to augment ERP systems as well. So one of the concepts that you and I have talked about over the years is this concept of the difference between ERP or enterprise-wide technologies and enterprise operations. Could you maybe help us understand that difference and why it's important to digital transformation?
Yeah, ERP was really kind of a siloed set of applications that would run HR, payroll, finance, supply chain, as we talked about before. Really managed and developed within those departments, within those roles and stakeholders within the organization. Operations, or enterprise operations, includes all of those applications, certainly following an enterprise-wide executive-sponsored vision for where the organization needs to go, and how all of those pieces will interrelate, interoperate, and integrate, so that, to Ryan's point, you can bring all of the information to a central source and use that as one source of the truth. That often spans disparate and legacy systems that have to remain in your digital strategy and transformation. So, that's where we really need to make some decisions about what that core enterprise solution looks like. And operations includes all of the ecosystem of applications and systems that run the entire enterprise. So it's no longer just ERP. It's no longer your grandfather's ERP, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's a good way to rethink, when you think about digital transformation, which is part of why I think digital transformation is a better word for organizations than just ERP or just, plug in technology name here. It's because the mix of technologies to support those enterprise operations that you're talking about is going to vary, depending on what your needs are and what industry you're in and all that good stuff, what sort of value you're trying to create for the organization. But again, you get organizations that can't even get past the basic automation of GL and accounting. Let's just say, if you struggle with that and you fail in an implementation of a GL and accounting system and maybe a basic inventory management system, then you're never going to get to that stuff that you're talking about, because you've blown all your resources just trying to get something more simple in place. It seems like that's where a lot of organizations struggle, at least in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and think about, to expand on your point, global organizations where you've got a rollout to 60, 70 locations all over the globe, that are run by different stakeholders, different cultures. Bringing all of that together in a central digital strategy or transformation strategy is a huge undertaking, but it can be accomplished if you take the kind of localization out of it and develop a central strategy for that core ERP system and one central source of the truth, and then kind of dispersing that or delivering that to the remote locations in a hub and spoke manner. So hub and spoke deployments have become really kind of the norm, especially for global operations. So that's I don't know if that's directly answering your question, but that's where I see things going for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and it does answer my question. Thanks for adding to that. And here's another question from Mitch on LinkedIn. He asks, often we hear start with the end in. Let me try that again. Often we hear start with the end in mind on determining what the goal or desired state to be achieved is regarding digital transformation. Is there ever really an end in terms of digital transformation, or does it turn into an arms race with your industry and your industry peers? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I love the idea of an arms race with your
Right.
peers or your competitors, right?
Who doesn't?
But there really should be an end goal in mind, and it should be measurable. Nothing measured is nothing gained, right? So when you enter into the digital strategy, which is upfront, which is in advance of even that phase 0 that we talked about, instead of paving cow paths, you're looking at what does the end state look like? What is going to make me as an organization more competitive, more responsive to my people, more aware of where my cost centers are and how things need to work together to create a single product, a single service delivery, whatever it is, and pull all that together as a measurable total cost of ownership of the implementation of the deployment of the digital transformation solution, and then a measurable point or a phase gate at the very end where you determine and you go back to the board and you say, these are the accomplishments that we've made along the way. This is the return that we expected. This is the return that we are getting. Kind of going back to the old time and motion studies that you referred to at the very beginning. What time and motion does it take to accomplish a task today? And what does it take 2 years from now when I'm completely done with the ERP implementation? And that is the advantage. That is a return on investment. So I think you do have to plan to measure it, right? You have to set up the goals, set up the objectives, and then measure it along the way and measure it at the end.
Right. Yeah. That's well put. And I think that, this thought that your transformation is never really over and there's never really sort of an end state. You're constantly evolving, constantly improving, constantly looking for ways to improve. That's terrifying to some organizations to think about. Wow, that's terrifying because we just want to get over this whole digital transformation thing. Or if you're in the middle of one, the last thing you want to think about is just never getting out of the cycle of constantly improving and deploying stuff. But that's sort of how organizations need to think and operate going forward. Is rather than viewing it as a big, massive, one-time event, it may have some upfront focus, but you kind of you want to keep tweaking and improving over time. That sort of continuous improvement mentality that became popular in the 90s and beyond. Yeah, well, good. So you talked about interoperability and you did describe it a little bit, but maybe could you just maybe summarize again for us what is interoperability and how does it relate to transformations in the future? Because I think I think this is a really important point that not enough organizations think about when they think about their transformations. Oftentimes they're looking for that one silver bullet that says, I'm going to implement SAP or Microsoft D365 or Epic or Workday, whatever it is. And they think that's the answer. That's the technology that's going to give us what we need. But this concept of interoperability is different than that. How would you, maybe you could just help us unpack that a bit more?
Well, everyone that we talk to is looking for, within their digital strategy, a unified platform so that they can pull data and information in real time from multiple and disparate sources. The answer to that is very often, well, implement a new ERP system, implement SAP, Infor, Oracle, Workday, whatever it is, and you'll have a unified system. Think about all the edge solutions or edge applications and legacy applications that we talked about that are still a part of the operations, still a part of the organization. The interoperability piece is you're getting information in a bidirectional conduit from those disparate applications and systems into that central ERP system, into that central source of the truth. And that's what interoperability is truly about. It's been variously called a best of breed type of approach, where you may have a different system for HCM and payroll than you have for finance and supply chain. You can't easily change that. How do you optimize that? By connecting the ERP systems across, an interoperability hub, so to speak. You pick one source of the truth, one ERP system that's going to house, for instance, financials and the reporting and analytics, and then bring the other systems into that in a bidirectional manner, which is the interoperation of those disparate systems. And think about, mergers and acquisitions. They happen all the time. There's no real predicting that. It can happen in the middle of an implementation. And I've worked with many clients who have found the need to integrate a new system into the corporate standard as they're implementing a new ERP system, right? So in order to adopt that new acquisition or merger, you really need to interoperate with the systems that are going to be there in legacy until you have the whole system or the whole enterprise up on the same platform. And that's what the interoperability piece is all about. That's what's been missing in the past with regard to ERP and ERP system deployment, is establishing that interoperability up front.
Right. Now, how would you counter either an ERP vendor sales reps message, or this is sort of like a political debate, right? This whole concept of single ERP or interoperable multiple systems. It feels like that's an ongoing debate that will probably never get resolved, just like politics or other things in life. But what do you say to people that say, no, why would you do this interoperability thing with multiple systems when you could just have one system that's fully integrated, ties together all your data, single source of truth, single throat to choke, whatever you want to call it? How do you counter that, or what's the trade-off there that you see?
Well, it comes back to Ryan's question earlier, right? It's really how do you take disparate systems that if you talk to the software vendors, they can tell you that we can provide one unified system that is a source of the truth, that we can provide everything that you need in one shell. You think about the software vendor and what their priorities are and how they're going to move forward. They can only touch one system. They can only touch their enterprise software system, right? Their platform. The ancillary applications and everything else that runs the organization still need to feed into that. So organizations often find out that as they go along, they're choosing a partner, an ERP vendor that is doing great things in terms of HR and finance. But they don't touch the workforce management piece. They don't touch the Chronos, the APIs, the document management systems. And so bringing all that together so it interoperates as one really requires that independent kind of third party high level view of how everything will fit. And that's what we offer here at Third Stage. But you can choose whichever partner, or internally your enterprise steering team that is really going to help determine exactly how you pull all those pieces together. The best of breed approach is often just unavoidable because you cannot move some of the systems that have managed operations and processes in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. You look at a manufacturer, for example, there's so many different applications you need to have, even if you think you want to go with a single ERP system. And maybe that's your
Right.
propensity is to lean heavy towards, if we could, let's do as much as we can within a single ERP system. And I think that's where most of our clients start, is they sort of lean towards a single system if they could. And of course, in a perfect world, if there were a single system out there that does everything you're talking about, then sure, have at it. But the problem is most, if not all, ERP systems are limited in their capabilities. And so you end up trying to figure out, how do we plug the holes? How do we give ourselves that competitive edge or that competitive advantage? Back to the question of one of our listeners earlier. So I think that's one of the big challenges.
Absolutely. And the ERP systems, the ERP vendors are evolving to take on more and more of those edge solutions, more and more of the portfolio of applications and systems that you need to operate as a business, especially within verticals and micro verticals, industry specific solutions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned Workday earlier, so let me pick on that for a second. But you look at upstart, relatively new or newer enterprise technology vendors like Workday in the human capital space, or another example would be Salesforce in the CRM or sales automation space. Those are two examples of opportunities that were created because ERP systems couldn't be everything to everyone. So as a result of that, ERP is trying to be everything to everyone, but these upstart competitors realizing they can't be everything to everyone, and we can do certain bits and pieces better than a single ERP system. That's why Workday is so successful. That's why Salesforce is so successful in the CRM space, is because of the limitations of these bigger ERP vendors. So I think you're constantly going to have this push and pull of, let's try to have a single system, but in doing so, we're creating weaknesses and vulnerabilities unintentionally, of course. And so there's always going to be other upstart competitors, other vendors that are out there trying to fill those voids, fill those gaps, create niches, or create capabilities that others aren't able to do.
Absolutely. And the ERP vendors themselves are trying to, get better and better functionality within their own CRM systems, within their own workforce management systems, and deploy that as well. But they are also much more interoperable than they used to be. So the Internet of Things, the ability to connect disparate systems in that interoperability framework that we talked about, through APIs, through movement of data back and forth, has really made it so that you can have a core ERP system and you can branch out to some of these other solutions that you just mentioned as the ERP vendor of choice develops their own internal systems. And then you're going to have a decision to make down the road, right? Do we adopt the new CRM system that your software vendor partner has created, or do we stay with Salesforce? So,
right, yeah, it's a comment, and you have to look at that objectively. And I think here's a comment that I think sort of ties this all together, which I really like, and this is well said. This is from Saurav over on LinkedIn. He says, according to me, all ERP systems are good. Important is your consultant, how much they understand your business, pain areas, organizational goals, and how they can map these all for you. And I think that's really well put, because I think that at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about your business and what your needs are. Your software sales reps are going to have their opinion, their incentives, their motives that may or may not be aligned with what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization. So you have to take it for what it's worth, take it with a grain of salt when you get this messaging from software vendors that say, no one's doing single or no one's doing best of breed anymore. It's all about single ERP. Well, you have to recognize that's because they're trying to sell you a single ERP system. It's not because that's for you. So
what's the motivation?
Right. So I think that's really the key is let your business drive what sort of technologies you're going for, rather than the other way around. Um, so I guess just to summarize this all and to sort of tie this all together, bring it full circle as sort of a closing question here. What, given the fact that there's so many options in the marketplace, technology is changing so quickly, there's a lot to think about as you're defining your digital strategy and roadmap. And certainly as you go to execute on that strategy and roadmap, there's even more to think about. But what advice would you give to an organization that's about to embark on some sort of digital transformation or systems modernization initiative?
Uh, it's really pretty simple. It's establishing that strategy up front before you make a selection of a vendor or multiple vendors, or really determine how you're going to go forward from a technology standpoint. Get your people enrolled, get your people involved in making the changes that are going to make the organization better, and bringing that into focus. I hate to use the word focus groups, but focus groups, workshops, understanding what the executive imperatives are for the organization, and then doing really a top down, we want to get to a new level of performance as an organization, and then bottom up, here's how we want to participate in what the new enterprise system or operations solution platform is going to look like, and get the organization moving in the same direction, right? Everyone's waving the same banner and moving forward. Without that full buy-in, without that unidirectional movement, you're apt to fail. You're apt to have differing levels of performance and user adoption as you're going forward, unless you get everybody on the same page. So that strategy, selection of a vendor that is a great partner going forward, and then getting into the phase zero approach of preparing the organization, preparing data sources to be normalized and cleansed and put into the new system. And also all of the integration points and how everything will operate as you go through this interim period where you're supporting operations as well as the project delivery. And that's very important so you don't overwhelm your people. And, I don't know if that was a simple answer or I really just got into the layering of it, but it is strategy before everything else.
Yeah, and back to one of the questions, one of the earliest questions from the audience that I got to today. It's sort of like you need to avoid that sense. I don't want to say avoid the sense of urgency, because we're all operating with a sense of urgency, and you want to act with a sense of urgency, but you don't want to act with such a sense of urgency that you actually create more complications and more problems for yourself that are going to slow things down later on. So in other words, when you talk about getting strategic alignment or getting that strategy laid out up front, you also talked earlier about implementation readiness and sort of the phase zero of planning before you start rolling out those chosen technology or technologies. Some people may think in their minds, well, intuitively, that means I'm slowing down the project. It means I can't get to value realization faster. But the reality is the stuff you're talking about is actually going to speed things up. I mean, if you get alignment, you have strategic focus and clarity, you have your resources mobilized, you have a clear strategy, all that stuff. Yes, you have to invest some time up front to do that, but that speeds things up so much later on, and it avoids so many other headwinds and obstacles that organizations too commonly face. Would you agree with that?
Eric, we've seen that establishing an upfront PMO, a program management, a strategy, and embarking on a phase zero before embarking on phase one of the implementation cuts at least 35% of the cost and time off of an implementation. 35% is probably extremely conservative. So yes, to your point, that really does save time, money, and really for the organization, the risk mitigation is huge in that. So organizations really need to factor that out.
Right. And I'll take one stab at tying this all to pop culture for a second, which I'm terrible at, by the way. But I am a big fan of the Netflix show Stranger Things. I don't know if you watched that or not, but it's a show about reality, and then you've got the upside down world, which is sort of like a dark, evil parallel universe of the real world. And it's sort of like if you could run in Stranger Things, if you could run two parallel implementations, you'd have the one that's in the upside down world, which is sort of the dark, evil universe. That's where you do things the way that most organizations do it, which is let's just jump right in, let's just start doing stuff, and we're going to do it faster. Well, it creates, monstrosities of implementations when you do that. But if you do what you're saying, you actually speed things up, and things actually go a lot more smoothly in that parallel universe. So if only we could do like beta testing of two parallel universes, like upside down world, this whole Stranger Things concept, I think we could probably get to the bottom of this a little bit easier. But I think that's a really good metric to work from, though. That 35% metric is, I agree with you, that is pretty conservative, but it's still very material. That's a difference between a 2-year project versus a 2.5 to 3 year project. And you're probably going to get more value out of it too. That's the other part of it. Not only is it going to speed things up by doing what you're talking about, but you're going to get a ton more value out of it. You're going to create a lot less heartache and heartburn for the organization. So that's a whole nother set of metrics that are impacted as well.
And less operational risk along the way. I was wondering where you were going to go with that analogy with the Stranger Things. But I think the next project that we're involved with, we should probably use that as maybe the name of the project, Stranger Things.
Stranger Things. Not a bad idea. And then there's a lot of spin-off terminology you could use from that as well. So, oh, good. Well,
Absolutely.
Great. Well, this is really good stuff. I know we could talk about this for hours, and we do talk about this stuff for hours.
We usually do, Eric. So
yeah. Exactly. But for our audience's sake, we'll wrap it up in the interest of time. But I want to thank you for being here, Greg. This is a great first time appearance you had here as a solo discussion or a one-on-one discussion. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you.
All right. And thank you to the audience for all the great questions. Thank you for being here today. Keep an eye out for this edited, polished up interview becoming part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast, which we release every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms that you might subscribe to podcasts, whether that be Amazon, Google, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So be sure to check a new episode tomorrow. And then a week from tomorrow is when this interview will be featured on that podcast. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to it as well. I am totally biased, I'll admit it, but I think it's an awesome show. So be sure to check out that podcast and look forward to seeing you there. So thanks everyone for being here today, being part of our production of this podcast. Thank you again, Greg, and hope you have a great week. And we hope to see you next Tuesday on our weekly digital transformation live streams. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks all.